All right, so I wanted to go over custom scripts in Delta-CLI a little bit. We haven't covered this since maybe the very first code review we did on Delta-CLI, because at that point there was nothing but a custom script. So a lot of you have added steps to a deploy script. I've got Darby's TitleNet deploy script up here, which is probably the most complex one I've seen. There are some of similar complexity, but you can see there's a lot of custom steps happening here to do various things like clear the APC cache is happening. Or that's the NetSuite thing. Here's the APC cache one, and then here. A lot of custom things happening. And Graph has some custom scripts beyond the deploy scripts even. So this here, upload product names, is a completely custom script, doesn't ship with Delta-CLI at all. And just so everyone knows, the documentation for this that we're covering today is on dev.deltasys.com. There's the custom scripts section, which should cover most of what we're going to talk about today. Mostly there are a few pitfalls and gotchas that you should be aware of as you get started on these. And then also I want to point out that, sometimes when you're doing something complex like this APC clear, that might be a good candidate for adding a step type to Delta-CLI directly, so that this can change from this big block of custom code to something more like this, where you're just saying like project clear APC cache or something like that. So I wanted to kind of make people aware of that too if they're writing something that's particularly complex in one of these custom scripts. But we'll just kind of get started with a little demo here. So I've got a completely empty project. There's nothing here at all. So the first time you run any Delta command that actually tries to do something, it will complain to you because you don't really have anything going. So to get started, we're just going to create our project config. Go ahead and make some SSH keys, and this is a custom project. So when you get started with something like this, that's all you have in your config, is something that's setting the project name. So you don't really have a lot to work with. Out of the box, you do have kind of a template for your deploy script. So a lot of you will have seen things like this, where you're adding a step, and then maybe you're saying, I want to go from an rsync, I want to do an rsync from like src to http docs, and that's your deploy script. So it could be something as simple as that. And at that point, your deploy is going to have, we need to make an environment real quick too. Doesn't really matter what it is. Your deploy is now going to have a few steps built in. So you can see there's some default stuff that Delta-CLI would always do, and then there's also an rsync step there that you've added in your particular project. The thing that I don't know if a lot of people are aware of is that you can take that same basic API and build upon it to do something completely custom for your project. So this can be kind of a lighter weight version of the cron stuff that's built into Delta-Zen, or the commands and dewdrop, that kind of thing. But it can also be additive on top of those, just to give you a slightly nicer workflow, and we'll demonstrate that in a second here. The thing that I really want to go over is the different types of steps that you can add for this kind of thing. So the most basic is this, where my first argument is the name of the step, and the second argument is a command to run on the local shell. So let's run our commands over here. So first, if we just run Delta, we'll see that in our output we now have our custom script listed. So I just run Delta custom script, we'll see that our step ran. Whenever you're just doing a shell command or an SSH command, it's the exit status that determines if it fails or succeeds. So in this case, it's just ls, so of course that succeeded and we completed the script. We can also see that in our list steps, our step name is here, the list file step name that we gave it, and the actual type of step that it is output there as well, so you can kind of see what's going on. That also gives us the ability to manually skip a given step. In this case, we only have one, so we can see that we've skipped that. So that all comes from adding your custom step. If you want to actually interact with another environment somewhere, all that changes is you say create environment script instead of create script. That's equivalent to doing this. So you can say either one, it's the same thing. So an environment script is just one that requires you to specify an environment one way or the other. So let's say we wanted to switch our LS from running locally to running on the remote machine. This is what that looks like. So now if we try to run that, it's going to try to run it on whatever the remote environment is. So that could be, this test environment we've created up here, new dev environment, whatever. So let's go ahead and actually create like an actual environment real quick, I guess. So because this is just a new demo project, we need to get our API keys created, and so we had an issue installing our key. But that should be fine for this. We should now have so we've got a demo environment now. And this step would be run against that rather than locally. The next thing that comes up a lot in these scripts, and one of the little gotchas that I wanted to point out that I've helped a few people with, it can be kind of confusing, is when you're using a PHP callback for your step. I've seen a lot of people do this. And this is very problematic because this will succeed, because when you're doing PHP code for a step, the only way it fails is if you throw an exception, and you're not throwing an exception here. But you're not actually doing anything either. Like, all this has done is create an SSH step. It's not actually run anything. So if you think about it, when you see things like this throughout your script, it's obvious it's not running the SSH command right now, like at the time this file is being parsed, because there would be no environment set, there would be no opportunity to set arguments or anything like that. So just saying project SSH or project rsync is creating the step, it's not actually running the step and generating a result. So in the very least, you'd want to do there are a couple little things to add to that for something like an SSH step. So the first is you need to say, what is the environment that is going to be used? So that looks like this. And then on line 17 there, you see that we're actually running the step. So you'll see that in a lot of Darby's TitleNet scripts here, where you can see he is doing project SSH, and then he's setting the environment, and then he's running the step. So you don't just create it. And then the final bit to point out is you can return from your PHP code the result of a step. So whatever happened on that SSH command then becomes the result of that PHP code. So rather than it just being was an exception thrown, you're saying the result of this step should be the result of whatever this SSH command was. So that's a pretty key difference there between just creating a step, which is all you really have on line 15, configuring it to use whatever environment the person has specified, if you're doing it inside PHP code or something custom where you're not just calling add step, and then finally actually running the step. So I want to perform the command or whatever the step might be. It could be anything really. So that distinction is important to keep in mind, because otherwise you could have this thing kind of silently just saying, okay, yeah, I created the step, that worked, so let's keep going. That's obviously not what you're going for in that case. And then finally, beyond these basic adding a step like this, doing a shell command, or doing a PHP callback, which is this example here, there are several other step types that are built in. And some of these I think are pretty familiar to people, but others you might not have used directly. One that came up today on Graph was this allow writes to remote folder. This is a slightly nicer way of, it doesn't actually do just a chmod recursively over it. It actually just goes to each folder and adds write permissions to it. So you're not setting the execute bit on every file in there, which is kind of nice. So it'll do it a little bit more nicely, but also obviously it's more human readable. These are built into the deploy script by default, but there might be other cases where you want to check before I run this script, I want to know that this person's committed all of their code. If it's something that relies on having the code available in Git for someone else to be able to replicate what they're doing or reproduce it, then it might be wise to put a git status is clean at the beginning of that. And similarly, if this script would have adverse effects if you ran it on a different Git branch, you might want to add this on there to say, you have to use the master branch when you're going to production with this script. Sometimes this is nice to skip on staging. So if, typically your staging site, you deploy develop to it, but you want to deploy a feature branch to it temporarily for someone to review something. You might have this step on your script, your deploy script, or anything else, and you might want to skip it in those situations. So that would look just like the example we did earlier, where you take whatever the step name is. Let's actually do the deploy one so you can see that. The steps. So we can see this Git branch matches environment. If it was something where I know I'm deploying a feature branch to staging, so I don't want to enforce that develop goes to staging, then you could do that, and it would skip that step for you. If you want to make sure the script can only hit a dev environment, so this is something that never should really happen on production, or a non-dev environment, I guess. You can throw that on a script. The most common case for this is the commands that do a watch. So on the WordPress side of things especially, there's a watch command that every time you save a file, it'll push it up automatically. Obviously, you don't want to do that on production, so this step is automatically built into those watch commands. This kill a process matching a name and start background process, which is down here, are kind of nice if you've got something that runs in the background. So WebSockets on Total Care Health or Communicate on Demand, these commands are used. This might be superseded by the supervisor D stuff that Mark has been working on recently. So it would be more of a server level thing than a Delta-CLI thing, but this is available in the least, for when you're pushing to a dev environment or a staging environment, you could have it start the WebSocket server, that kind of thing. And then just a couple more that are worth pointing out. This one here, you may have hit a couple times. Whenever you're interacting with a production environment in a way that could be kind of risky in some situations, this will run to force you to kind of double check what you're doing and enter an authorization code. So I'll show what that looks like real quick. We'll just push some random file, I guess. So if I was trying to SDP a file to graph like this, which I guess I don't need to do that, it's going to say, hey, you're trying to do an ad hoc SDP to a non-dev environment, so you have to enter this code if you actually want to go through with that. You can add that to any script as well. So if you have something where you want people to, have to stop and enter this code before they run it against a particular environment or anything like that, that's available. And then finally, this last one is running a script within another script. So this is used a lot internally in Delta-CLI. The most common cases would be like in DB copy. So if I wanted to do a copy of the database from staging to my Vagrant box on graph, you can see here I killed it, but it's starting to do a DB dump on staging, and it's showing you it's on step 0 of 3 of that script, and then it would go on to do a DB restore on Vagrant and so on. So this is a good way to like reuse code in your scripts if you've got more complex custom scripts. So that's kind of all the steps. And then the final thing, I mentioned that I was going to point this out at the beginning, is an example of how I use these custom scripts is for graph, they've got this random upload that I have to do occasionally. So there's a do-drop command to actually process this file that they'll give me, which is they're trying to fix all of their really crappy names and their internal inventory system. But just doing this normally, I would have to SSH to the server, or I would have to copy the file they give me up to the server, then SSH to the server, then run this do-drop command. So it can be kind of a tedious thing, and there are steps you can mess up. So you can make these little wrappers in Delta-CLI where instead of doing that, you just have upload product names as your little wrapper script name. You can do whatever you want with Symfony console APIs. So in this case, I'm adding an argument for file, so you have to give me a file name. And then I've got one step that's a custom Delta-CLI step to actually grab the file and copy it up to the environment that the person specified. So that uses SDP, and if it fails, it'll stop the script and all that stuff. And then finally, just a normal SSH step to run the do-drop command. So now when I get these files from Morgan, it's one step for me instead of having to do those manual things to copy it up and then SSH into the server and run that myself. So I find these little wrapper scripts to be really helpful from a workflow standpoint to just make it so, take something that's a 4 or 5 step manual process and turn it into a 1-step process that has error checking and all that stuff. So that's one of the main use cases of this for me. Any questions on all of that?
That looks great. I'm trying to think of do like a 1-step install for projects. A 1-step, like it would automatically pull staging database and things like that.
So. Yeah, I would like to see some kind of wrapper scripts like that now that we have all the individual pieces of like DB copy and all that junk, like tying that together to say, I don't know, for a WordPress site, you could just have one built in, and then for the other sites, kind of like with the deploy, have a couple placeholder steps and then add your database copy and configuration changes here kind of thing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Looks good, Brad. I like it. Then the documentation's up there. What was the
pretty much everything we talked about, yeah.
Custom script. So Darby, will this be helpful to you?
I think so. I think I'm actually using several parts of it already. Like Brad was pointing out, I don't have a create custom script thing going on, but I imagine it could be useful in some cases. Perhaps like that APC clearing thing, that might be something that theoretically we might want to do outside the context of a deployment. So that could be good to kind of refactor out as a separate script, but I don't know, it might be a bad example, but yeah, I can definitely see the utility in it. Yeah, thanks, Brad.
Cool. Yeah, I think the APC clear thing would be a cool step to be able to add to a script with a one-liner, and also maybe just a command. Yeah, so you could do like Delta APC clear production and just have it do it. Yeah, I'll play around with that a little bit.